In this lesson, we are going to connect all the pieces together by connecting the view model to the view and making the view a bit interactable. So in our view model, we provided a flow of product. And now the product screen, the view, needs to observe this flow of data. So first we need to connect these two together. So let's first remember where we instantiated our product screen. This was here in the main activity. This is our chance to pass the view model object to the screen. And so here we need to instantiate the view model. But we can't instantiate it in this simple way that we would do for other classes, because view model needs to be tied to the life cycle of the activity. So view model needs to know when the activity is in the create stage, when is it in the resume stage, and also on destroy stage. For this reason, Android provides a way to create view models. View model provider is kind of like a factory for view models. And as you see, we can pass the activity as the life cycle owner. And then we specify the class of the view model like this. And now we get an instance of the product view model that is life cycle aware. Now we can pass this to the product screen. Product screen doesn't have any argument yet, so I can just modify it by pressing Option Enter, add parameter to the function. And now product screen will have the view model as an argument. So now I want to access the product object that we fetch from the API. So then I can replace all these hard-coded data with the real data. View model provides the product flow, so I can access it like this. But right now we are accessing the flow itself, not the product object. So if I want to use it here, you can see I don't have access to the image of the product. This is when the view needs to kind of subscribe to the flow to be able to observe the new incoming data. And the way to do that with Compose is like this. So now we are observing the data in a lifecycle aware way. Now, as you see, we are still not accessing the properties of the product. So the only property that we have is value, which is state. So if you remember, we are using mutable state flow. So this is giving us the state, but we want the value of the state. So you would have to first access the value and then the property. But this is not a very clean way to do. So there is a simpler way to do this, which is by replacing this equal with the keyword by. And this in Kotlin is a property delegation, which means it unwraps the value and then it gives you the properties that are in the value. As you see, I get a compilation error here, which is saying that get value is unresolved. So I just need to import it. Option Enter, and now it's imported. If for some reason it doesn't import for you, automatically this is what you need to import. And now I have access to the properties of the product. But we still have one error, which is about null safety. So the flow is providing a nullable product. Let's go back to it and check. The data will be null until the product is fetched from the API. So that's something we need to deal with. And in Kotlin, to check whether it's null or not, we can do it like this, with a question mark and then let code block. So if it's not null, this code block will run. And we can access the not null object with the keyword it. As you see, it is a type of product and is not null. So this is when I have access to everything and I'm sure that they are not null. So I don't want to wrap the whole screen and all these composables in this let code block. So I prefer to extract all the composables that rely on product. And it shows me a warning that this align modifier will not be resolved anymore because I'm not extracting the box. But I will handle that in a second. First, let's extract it. I'm going to call it product content. And then this product will not be nullable anymore. Now I have access to product image and title and everything. So this align modifier, I didn't extract the box because I want this to be the container. So I'll just create another box as the parent of this product content. And with the modifier fill max size. Nice. Now I can bring this null check here and pass the it to the product content. Nice. Now let's replace all these hard-coded stuff with the real data. As you see, we can just replace the title and description because they are strings. But price isn't a string, that is a float. And this is where we enter the territory of formatting. So we want to format the price and also the rating because that's also not a string. I want to format both of them to display them in a certain way and basically convert them to string. There are multiple ways to convert numbers into strings. And one of the ways is to use the strings XML. So it's located here. Strings file contains translated texts, but also formatted texts. So in my case, my app only supports English, so I put all the English texts here. But if I wanted to support Spanish, for example, then I would need another XML file with the same texts but translated to Spanish. And right now I'm going to use this string file to format the numbers. So I'm going to create a new string called price formatted. And so the format that the design shows is a $sign followed by a space character followed by the number. So I write just that. And of course the number is a variable, it's coming from the server. So I need a placeholder for it here. In the string file, this is the way to define a placeholder. Percentage, and because I have a floating point number, F. And I want two fractions of the float to be visible. And the way to do that is like this. Now whatever value I get from the floating point number is going to be shown in this format. Now I want to use this in the product screen. If you remember, this is the way to access string resources. I pass the price as an argument. So now we have a formatted price, which we can pass as a text. Let's do the same for the rating. So I'm going to add another string here. Let me just copy paste. So same thing, we have first a placeholder for this rate, which is a floating point, but it does need only one fractional digit. So I'm going to change this to 1 and then parentheses. Inside it, we need a placeholder for this digit, but it's not a floating point. This is an integer, and the integer placeholder is %d, and then ratings. And oh yeah, let's change this. And now we can use this in the screen. So I pass both rate and the count as two arguments. This is a bit long line, so I'm going to export these two to their own variables. Now let's run the app again and see if we can get real data instead of this hard-coded text. Oh yeah, I broke the previews. I'm going to fix them later, but for right now, I'm going to disable them by commenting them out with comment /, or in Windows, control /. Nice, we are getting the data, but it looks exactly the same. So let's fetch another product. This ID is number 1. I'm going to change it to number 2 just to see. Yes, now you can see all the data is new and coming from the server. Nice. So the product ID is very much hard-coded. For fun, I'm going to make it randomize between number 1 and number 5. And we can do that with the random class from Kotlin. So I need to give it this kind of limitation to just randomize between this. The 6 itself is not included. So it will be from 1 to 5. And then I can replace this. In a real app, I wouldn't do this, of course. Usually in an e-commerce app, you see a list of products and you press on them and then you pass the product ID to the API. So just for fun, for the sake of this course, I'm going to randomize it. Why not? And now every time that I run the app, it gets another product. Now, if you look at the code of the product screen, you realize there is a situation here that only if product is not null, we are displaying the product content. But what if it's null? So product being null means it's not fetched yet. So it can be 2 states. One is that it's being fetched, so the API call is happening. The other scenario is the fetching went wrong. So an error happened, can be anything, internet connection, server error, or anything like that. So that means this screen can have any of the 3 states. One is loading, one is success, one is error. And so far we covered only the success when the product is fetched. But we need to also handle loading state and the error state. So first let's start with the loading state. As you see, the view can only see if the product is null or not null. That means the view cannot detect between loading and error states. And that's something that the view model needs to figure out and let the view know. So this nullable product has this limitation, which means we need to change this type. So I'm going to create a class and call it view state. This class will have all the data that the view needs to know. So it has the product, which is nullable. It has a Boolean to show if it's in the loading state. And also a Boolean to show if an error has happened. And now I can replace this product with the class view state. So now the type of the flow is view state. And as you see, it says null cannot be a value because I need to give it an initial state here. So initially, the product will be null because it hasn't been fetched yet. And then is loading is true and error is false at the beginning. And I can also remove this type definition because Kotlin knows the type is now view state. So this is the initial state, and then we need the success state here when the product is fetched. So I initialize the view state one more time, and I set the product. I set the is loading to false because the loading has finished, and then there has error also to false because this is the success state. So as you see, we have some repetitive code which can be more concise. And one nice feature of Kotlin is the default values. So I can make the product null by default, make the loading false by default, and then make the error also false by default. And then I only pass the one that I want to change. So in the case of initial state, that is loading. Now this can become shorter. And in the success state is only the product. Now I want to change the name of this flow property because this is not a flow of product anymore. This is a flow of view state. So I'm going to use a nice feature of Android Studio, which is refactor. By pressing Shift F6, you can change the name and refactor all the references. So that means also the product screen is referring to view state, not product anymore. Nice. And also this variable, I want to also change it to view state. So now let's update this part. So here we need the product property. And I want to now show a loading indicator if we are in the loading state. So first let's add an if condition to check if the isLoading is true. And in Compose, an easy way to show a loading indicator is linear progress indicator. Now let's run this and test, see how it looks like. As you see, it's really fast. One way to simulate a slow internet connection or just a slow API call is to bring down the internet connection speed of the emulator. And that's very easy to do. First, I press this triple dot, and in the cellular, you can see we have a full network type and the strength is moderate. But I need something slower, so I'm going to try something like this one and poor strength. And if I reload it, you see now a very, very ugly indicator here. So it's not taking the whole width. I'm going to add a modifier and say fill max width. Not max size, because that will take the whole height of the screen. But I just want it to be wide. Let's check it one more time. It's too much stuck to the app bar, so I'm going to give it some padding as well. And only to the top, not to the other directions. Very small padding. Yep. So loading state is covered. I'm going to fix this broken previews. Let's uncomment them, bring them back. And I need to import everything. So this is an interesting situation. Product screen now depends on the view model. So to be able to show the preview, I would need to instantiate view model. But that's a very tricky dependency, because how do you tell it to return success states with a specific product data? So there is a simple solution for this, which is to duplicate this function signature and change it a bit. This is now what is called overload. So these are overloaded functions, which means functions with the same name, but different parameters. So I want the overloaded function to have view state as a parameter. And it works better with just that, because it actually just needs the view state, not the full view model. And I'm going to use this second function in the first one. Now we can use this one in the activity and the second one only for the previews, which means I can make this private. It won't be used outside of this file. So now this one can be used in the previews, and then I can instantiate a view state. For example, for this one, so I want this preview to show the success state. And then I change the second preview to show the loading state. Let's see if we can get the previews working. Nice. So let's go back to handling the error. Let's see what happens if we don't handle the error. I'm going to run the app on the emulator, but turn off the Wi-Fi before doing it. And now, when we run the app, it closes immediately. So the app is crashing. And let's see what is exactly the reason for this crash. So we go to the logcat, which is the place we hope to see some clue. And you can see this is just a very general error. It says fatal exception and the process ended. So when we imported the Ktor library for the API calls, we didn't configure it to log everything, including the errors. And for that, we need to first import a new dependency. I'm going to copy and paste it from my other project. So Ktor client login. And now I sync at one time. And then in the Gradle file, I import it here. And the place to configure it is in the Ktor client. Here we need to install another plugin. So that's logging, and then we configure it like this. So then it logs everything. Now let's run the app one more time and see the crash. Now we can see that before this fatal exception, this API call failed with this error, unknown host exception. This exception happens when the client cannot access the server, which in this case is because there's no Wi-Fi. So let's go back to the ViewModel. And here, this is where the exception happens, when the API is trying to fetch the product. So we need to catch this exception. And doing that is very easy. We just surround this whole code block with a try catch. And you see here is where we catch the exception and we handle it here. So if the product is fetched successfully, we won't reach to this catch block. But if we do, then we want to tell the view that this is an error state. And in this state, the product is null and we only have the has error set true. And then what happens is that the screen will not fall into any of these two code blocks. So we need to add another if. So I want to show an error message when this happens. So let's go back to the string file and add a new string here. I have it copied already. So let's add a text here. I want to see in the preview how this looks like, but we don't have a preview for the error state. So I'm going to add one. So of course, this error message needs to be better aligned and styled. So I'm going to first add a style. And I want this text to be in the center vertically and horizontally. So I need to wrap it in a column. And then in the column, I need to specify the arrangement. So it's still not in the center because the column itself is very small. It doesn't take the whole space. So let's also give it a modifier to fill the whole size. Now it's vertically centered, but I also want horizontally center alignment. Now it's nicely aligned in the center, but I also want the lines to be center aligned together. So that's the text align that we need to set it in the text itself. Nice, this is what I wanted. And now let's run the app. So we catch the error and we show this error message. We are telling the user to try later, but user cannot interact with this message. So this is when I want to add a button here, a retry button. So we are adding more and more stuff here, and this method is getting long. And I want to keep it clean and concise. So let's extract this also to its own function. Yeah, this is nicer. So now let's add a button. And it needs this parameter on click. This is a function. This is how a callback function looks like in Android. Technical term for it is higher order function, but doesn't matter. It just is a callback. So you pass a method and it calls it whenever it wants. So I'm going to add a parameter to the error message called onRefresh. And the way to declare a higher order function is like this. This is the simplest callback. Doesn't require any parameter, doesn't return anything. It just invokes the callback. So I'm going to pass onRefresh to the button. And in the body of the button, we need to declare what we want to show in the button. So I want to show a text that says retry. Let's add one more string here. And then I can use it here. So now where we call the error message, we don't pass it anything. This is when we need the ViewModel to provide us with an onRefresh action. So I'm going to the ViewModel to define a new function. Let's move this one to the top first of all. And then I'm going to add a public function called onRefresh. And in the onRefresh is very simple. So we're going to fetch the product. And before fetching, we're going to change the state to loading state. And now, first I need to add one parameter here as well. And then pass that onRefresh function to the product screen. So the way to refer a function in Kotlin is like this. With a double colon between the object and the function. So now we are passing the onRefresh function from the ViewModel to the product screen. And then we need to pass it from the product screen to the error message. And that's it. Now we see some red lines here. That's because, again, I broke the previews. So here we also need to pass the onRefresh function. And of course, in the preview, I don't want this function to do anything. So I just pass curly brackets. This means the function doesn't do anything. And I copy paste it also for these two. Now let's run the app. Almost nice, but we need some space between the button and the text. So I add a spacer here. Let's actually just check the previews. The style of the text is also not right. Yes, now this is more like it. Let's run the app and see what happens if we click on the retry button. So it's happening pretty fast, but basically it's trying to fetch the product again. But now if I bring back the Wi-Fi, we're going to see if it actually fetches the product. Nice. By the way, if you noticed, the button and the text automatically have colors from our color palette. And that's because we are using a theme. Now let's go back to the app. As you see, one of the products has a pretty long description. So first of all, it's not completely readable because it's out of the screen. And also it overlaps with the price and rating. So let's first make it scrollable. This is the column containing all the product description. So we need to add a modifier here called vertical scroll. And this vertical scroll needs a state, as you see, a scroll state, which we can instantiate it by calling remember scroll state. What does this remember scroll state do? It helps the column to remember the exact position of the scroll. So let's say you have a chat screen and at any moment a new chat message might appear. While you're scrolling, a recomposition happens because the data changed. And now it would be pretty annoying if the screen scrolls to the beginning again. So this helps to prevent that situation by keeping the scroll position where it was. And now we have it scrollable. But it's still overlapping with the price and the rating. So one quick way to fix this would be to add a gradient background behind the price and the rating. And that's very easy to do. So in the same part of the layout where we declared the price, we're going to also declare a box. So let's give it a modifier. First of all, I wanted to fill the whole width. And then I wanted to have a height of, let's see, what is the biggest height that we have? Maybe this is not good enough. I'm going to add one more and give it 128. And then in a similar way that we aligned the price to the bottom, I'm going to also align this box to the bottom. However, it won't be bottom start, but bottom center. And the only thing that is left is a background color. And I want a gradient. The way to make a gradient background is with something called brush. Brush.vertical gradient. And it has a parameter which is a list of colors. And in Kotlin, we can create a list of colors pretty simply. So list of, and then I need to pass it a couple of colors. So I want the gradient to start transparent here and then fade to this dark blue at the bottom. And transparent color is a predefined color. That's easy. And then we have, now let's try it out. So this random function is giving me other products. So temporarily, I'm going to change this to ID 4 because I know that's the MacBook product. Now, as you see, we have some gradient here. It's almost what I want, but I want the end of the gradient to be more dark. So one trick to do is to duplicate the same color. So it will start from transparent. In the middle, it will be dark, and at the end, it will also be dark. So it kind of gives that effect like this. Now it's more readable and it gives the user the hint that there is something more to scroll for. And then you can scroll to the end and then you cannot read the rest. That's because at the bottom, we need another spacer. And then I give it the same size as the gradient background. This spacer shouldn't be here. It should be at the end of the column because of course the column is scrolling. Yes. And I'm going to undo that ID number 4. So as the last thing, I want to add a pull to refresh functionality because right now to see a new product, we need to rerun the app and restart the app. But I want to be able to refresh the product by pulling the screen to the bottom. And that's very easy to do in Compose. There is already a composable for this, which is called pull to refresh box. So this is an extension of box, but it has the pull to refresh functionality. We already have a box here as the parent of this whole screen. So we can just replace this by a pull to refresh box. However, it does need two more arguments, which is the refresh function, which luckily we already have here. And one more parameter, which is refreshing. So this tells the pull to refresh box to either show or not show the progress indicator. And is refreshing in our case means is loading. So we can access that in the view state. We do have one more error. So basically it's giving us the warning that be aware this is experimental. It can have bugs, for example. But for us, this is fine. I've tested this before. And now let's run it. So if I refresh to the bottom, you see this kind of familiar pattern, this progress indicator that disappears when the loading is finished. So now we get a new product every time we refresh. And as you noticed, our loading indicator is now a bit redundant. We have two loading indicators. So this is when I have to say goodbye to the previous loading indicator, which is this one. I'm going to just delete it and we should be just fine. So that's it. This was our simple app. As you see, you cannot do much more with the app. You cannot even buy this amazing t-shirt because for some reason there isn't even a purchase button in this e-commerce app. But we managed to implement the design using Jetpack Compose, integrate the API using Ktor, follow MVVM architecture, implement multi-threading using Kotlin coroutines, and eventually connect everything together and even handle some edge cases and make the UI a bit interactive. And with that being said, the key takeaways of this lesson is that Vue observes the flow provided by the ViewModel for any data changes. Vue notifies the ViewModel of any UI changes. Translated and/or formatted texts are placed in the strings.xml file. And the action items for this lesson: observe and display the data in the view, handle the edge cases like loading and error states, and most importantly, have fun and enjoy the rest of your Android development journey. And I hope to see you around.